Hello, everyone. I'm Dava Newman, and it is my pleasure to be able to moderate this session on Earth data and the revolution. So what's the revolution? Well, we have terabytes a day of Earth data, and this session is called a discovery session. So it's really to come to the forum and say, what do we do with all that data, and put that data into action, especially locally in our communities. We're going to have a marvelous session for you here with presentations. Let's get started and talk about Earth data and what it all means to us for climate and sustainability and a hopeful future for humanity. The gigabytes of data, I call them kind of Earth's vital signs, speaking to us. We have our constellations from space, Earth-observing satellites looking down, eyes on Earth. And we're measuring and monitoring temperature, sea level rise, and looking at our communities. So from the satellite data to the data we collect on the aircraft, from sensors all over the ground, combining all of this and basically serving up that data for humanity. How are we going to do that? What's the data show us? Well, I call it the vital signs of Earth. Earth is speaking to us. Spaceship Earth, I call her. Living, breathing Earth. And here's the signs. I showed you temperature. We know that we're at 1.2, approaching that 2%. It's hot. This is indisputable data. Carbon dioxide. We can monitor it, we measure it, take a look at the carbon cycle in 3 dimensions, 5, 10, 15, 20 kilometers up. You want to be in blue. We want to be below 400 parts per million. Today, we're at 419 if you checked. That's the yellow and the orange. Now, we can do something about this. This isn't gloom and doom. This is completely within our control to mitigate this and change human behavior. So this is what our data shows us. But now we're going to go into a deep dive. It's my pleasure to introduce our two speakers. First, we'll have Will Marshall, the co-founder and CEO of Planet, and he'll be followed by Angela Lungati, who's the executive director of Ushahidi. So welcome both. Here we go.
Thanks very much, Dava. It's a pleasure to be here. So we're here to talk about the Earth data revolution. And there's been a lot of discussions here at the World Economic Forum in Davos about the twin challenges of biodiversity loss and climate. And they really are massive challenges. And the quick summary of where we're at is that we're not going fast enough to mitigate these challenges. Two quick facts. We've wiped out roughly 70% of the life on the Earth in my lifetime. And it's getting worse. We wiped out another area of the size of the Netherlands of forests just last year. And on the climate side, we've raised the temperature of the planet by 1.2 degrees. And last year, we emitted more CO2 than any prior year. So it's not even we haven't even bent the curve. So we're not doing enough. We need to act faster, and we need to be bolder in those actions, okay? But the great thing is we've got some wicked new tools to bring to bear on these challenges. And Earth data are one of those tools that we can bring to bear. And the revolution is not small, and I think there's an underappreciation of what it can do, and there's an underutilization of that Earth data to help us with this sustainability transition. I'm going to tell a little bit about, this was one of your slides. So what's going on? Some of this Earth data comes from space. What's going on in space? Because there's a lot of confusion about what's going on in space. Everyone knows about the rockets. They're coming down in cost a little bit, about 4 or 5x in the last 5 years. But the lesser known thing, which is actually having a bigger and more profound impact, is that satellite cost performance has probably gone up about 1,000-fold in that time. It's like the mainframe to desktop computer revolution for space. Bus-sized satellites are now the size of little CubeSats and slightly bigger satellites that are enabling us to put up lots more satellites. And the real upshot of this is nothing to do with the rockets or the satellites, which I geek out on, but it's about the data. We are now producing 10 times more Earth imaging data than we were just a few years ago, and 10 times more communication data around the planet. And these are wicked new tools to bring to bear on our challenges. So at Planet, we have just over 200 satellites doing Earth imaging. This is how they work. Each one takes a strip of images as it goes around the Earth. The plane of orbit stays fixed with respect to the sun, and the Earth just rotates underneath this plane so that once per day we scan the entire landmass of the Earth. In addition, we have about 21 higher resolution satellites. So the scan happens at about 3-meter resolution. The higher resolution satellites are about 50 centimeter resolution and can image any particular place up to 10 times per day. So one scan, one higher resolution system. But it's a little bit more than just the imagery. We also put on top of that analytics to help us to understand that and make it useful, not just for the big agencies like NASA, where David and I used to work, but also to the NGOs and the educational institutions and so on. And so let me just give you a few examples. But the real bottom line is that this data enables smarter action, smarter decision-making and action, and is really enabling a transition from just awareness of our challenges, like we wake up at the end of the year and there's a big hole in the Amazon, to day-to-day action because we can tell if there's one tree taken down every single day. So, and it has applicability across a wide range of things, from security to disaster response to agriculture and so on. I'm just going to show a few examples. This was the flood just in California. This is deforestation here in Colombia. Tragically, we track that tree by tree across the whole world every day. Here's the glacier as seen over the last few years. This is from Landsat, the NASA mission, as the ice caps and the glaciers are melting. Here's the forest health as it's changing rapidly in Germany as the temperature rises, that you have bug beetle and other infestations, and it's predicted that up to 50% of this forest will be gone within the next 10 years because of climate change. Because of the deforestation problem, we actually launched a program with Norway, our partners at the UN Food and Agricultural Organization, to scan all 64 of the tropical belt countries to track deforestation every day and provide the forestry ministries in these countries with alerts. And we have seen tenfold increases in the number of actions. That's where they go and stop illegal deforestation or take them to landowners to court and so on. This is another project where we're working with our partners at Microsoft to look at all the energy facilities around the world. You might think we know where they all are. It turns out we often don't. So all the solar power plants, all the wind energy facilities across the globe. And finally, just give this example, which is pertinent to us all in Ukraine. Our colleagues at NASA Harvest, an outfit of NASA that does agricultural research, looked at the crop yield in every single field of the entire Ukraine, and was trying to look and assess the crop yield. And that matters, of course, both for the feeding of people in Ukraine and for the world security, food security challenges, because it's the breadbasket. Half the world's, the World Food Programme's food, which supplies the poorest countries in the world, comes from Ukraine. And what we found, what those researchers found at NASA Harvest was that the yield was actually only about 10% or 11% worse than the prior year, which is kind of remarkable considering they're in a war situation. But 22% of it was under Russian control. And furthermore, it was being stopped at the ports, and that eventually got solved, but still a lot of the grain is being stolen, and some investigative journalists found using our data that it was being stolen and taken to Syria and Turkey and other things. This is helping the international organizations figure out what we can do to solve these problems. And this example also just sheds light on how security and sustainability are increasingly related. You had a drought that caused a civil crisis in Syria, and here you have a war that's then causing exacerbating a food security crisis. So sustainability and security are increasingly interrelated. So all I want to end by saying is that we believe these new data sets of Earth imaging, 10 times more than just a few years ago, as I mentioned, really enables us to go from awareness to action. And in particular, what I've seen and how it works is that it leads to greater accountability, because the data, the facts, and enables smarter decisions on a day-to-day basis to make action to help us to take care of the planet and do the sustainability transition. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Will, so much. So now, Angela Lungati from the data, accountability. Of course, it has to be trustable data. And now we're going to talk about the people and how can we serve up the data to everyone and get everyone involved. Angela, please.
Thank you, Dava and Will. Now, from Will's presentation, I think we know that data is a key in helping us understand the scope of the problem that we're facing with climate change. There's one key data set that I think is missing in the whole equation, and that's the ordinary citizen's voice. The widespread proliferation of internet access worldwide since the year 2000 has led to an increase in the number of people who are connected to the internet. And as the world has become increasingly connected, we're also seeing platforms for self-expression continuing to grow, take root, and hold. So of course it makes sense that people don't want to be passive recipients of information. They want to become active participants of stories being told about their locations. They want their opinions expressed. They want to be able to share their insights around how certain things are affecting them and find ways of solving problems that are plaguing their communities. So we have digital platforms being used to collect data from citizens at scale. And these are being used to gather information or feedback around different issues. That could be crisis response, could be human rights protection work, could also be around democracy, and a host of other issues. Yet when it comes to climate change, that isn't happening as much. We have a wealth of Earth data out there, but there isn't enough around the voice of the ordinary people on how climate change is actually affecting them. I tend to use this analogy of a farm at the end of my presentation, but I'm going to use it at the start to drive my point home. Now, think of digital platforms, be it Ushahidi or other digital public goods, as fertile land because they represent the potential for greater participation, improved decision-making, and trust. And in the same way that libraries drove the demand for literacy, we see platforms like these driving the demand for data and participation. And then you look at the data that's being collected on these platforms, that information as good seeds. Seeds that hold promise to flourish and yield good produce if they are appropriately handled. But without farmers to till the land, those seeds are useless. And this is the point that I'm trying to make here, that the farmers in this equation here are those ordinary citizens that we either tend to ignore or only tend to look at as places to extract data from rather than engage actively in solving problems in our communities. What we've seen from our experience is that citizens play an important role in collecting data on climate change at the local level. For example, we know of community groups that are using data to collect and monitor changes in the timing of seasonal events, or things like the first frost, the flowering of plants, and the migration of birds. And this data, in the same way that the data that Will was showing us, can help us understand how climate change is affecting the ecosystems and wildlife in our backyards. The involvement of citizens in collecting and analyze data can help make sure that the policies and the decisions that we're making are much richer and are also representative of what the needs are on the ground. And this is important because it's important for us to make sure that the policy decisions are inclusive and sustainable. The World Visions project in Tana River in Kenya is a great example of this. They created a project focused on creating awareness on the importance of trees and the significant role that they can play in climate change mitigation. And this was done in partnership with local community-based organizations. And as a result, the community in Tana River banded together and was able to restore over 2,500 acres of degraded land. Now, one highlight for me from this project, One highlight for me from this project is the fact that the community's collective intelligence, that feedback around some of these issues, helps to surface a paradox in a local taxation ordinance, because tree nursery owners were getting taxed much higher than people who are engaged in cutting trees to produce charcoal and firewood. And this report was gathered through the Ushahidi platform and validated during public forums where people sat down to really query some of the feedback that was coming in. And the local leadership responded by tabling this particular issue in front of the local government. And now that is a conversation that is happening around amending that particular tax ordinance. think overall, the one thing that I would like for you to take out of this is the fact that collective responsibility and action is what's going to take us out of this crisis. In the same way that COVID-19 showed us that it will take all of us banding together, that collective action and responsibility, it's going to be no different when it comes to climate change. Tapping into that collective intelligence and wisdom of the people who are directly affected will help us to identify solutions that are effective and efficient in the fight for climate change. Working together will be key. Thank you.
Thank you, Angela and Will. Thank you both. So the data revolution for climate sustainability, from looking down on Earth, eyes on Earth, to how do we take action? How do we change human behavior through collective, local, I kind of call it hyper-local interaction. This is a discovery session. We want to involve all of you. We're open for questions now for any of us to have, we have a good 8 minutes or so here of discussion. And I think they'll bring the mic around. Sarah, please, go ahead.
Kimberly Mathieson. I run Hub Ocean. So we're very focused on aggregating data of all kinds for the ocean and for healing the ocean and accelerating industry to transform. So Will, I'm sorry I missed your presentation this morning. We know each other, but I would love to take it off the land and into the ocean. And I would just love to hear your thoughts on how we are expanding ever so deeply and broadly, right? Not just the coastlines, but the high seas, and how satellites and other forms of data collection can help us.
Absolutely, yeah, thanks for the question. Absolutely, oceans obviously 2/3 of the planet. Dava showed some really nice slides at the beginning about NASA data sets on oceans, and we at Planet did a project to look at the coral reefs, map all the coral reefs of the planet in consortium with academics and the Vulcan Institute, and it's Allen Coral Atlas, you can look it up, and helping organizations to put marine protected areas. It's one of the best examples I've seen of how data can power action, because as soon as we made this a digital public good online, we've since had 30 efforts of NGOs and countries to establish marine protected areas around their coral reefs. And you've got to think, well, why? They must have known that they had coral reefs. They definitely knew, Sri Lanka, for example, established, and they knew that they had coral reefs. The question is, what did data do? And I think it really, firstly, it gave them a precise area of where they needed to protect. Secondly, it gives them day-to-day information about are there illegal fishing vessels? Is there ocean bleaching? And so that they can know when to respond. And the third thing is that, which is the stick part of it, which is that everyone else gets to see their coral reefs as well. And so it's a bit of a pressure that they want to ensure that their coral reefs are healthy so that they don't look like the bad folks. So it's a carrot and a stick. But to your broader point, yes, we need much more work on the oceans. The oceans are so much of the life of the Earth, and our ability also to draw down carbon dioxide and give us oxygen. Of course, the plankton, phytoplankton, is the dominant source of our oxygen on the planet, 70% or so, and pulls down about 1/3 of the CO2. So we need a healthy ocean for all sorts of reasons that you probably know better than I do.
So thanks so much for teeing up the question. Sylvia Earle says, without the blue, we don't have the green. And I'd like people to think about this in terms of connecting all of Earth's subsystems. And we have to start with the oceans, the largest subsystem, from the oceans to the land, to the air, to space. Space is not special anymore, low Earth orbit. That's where the data is coming from. So if we could look at it holistically, oceans, land, air, and space, that's the ecosystem. And that's what we have to protect, all the biodiversity. Want to work, the world has to work for 100% of humanity and all living things, and it is urgent. Is there another question? Great, thank you.
Yes, I'm Carolina Sachs. I'm from Stockholm, Sweden, working with these issues. I was just wondering, how easy is it to measure with this kind of tools that you're using? How is it to measure like the microbiome in soil? How do you integrate that?
Do you guys have any?
Yeah, Angela, what data do you have, or in terms of the soil, or think about?
So our focus as an organization is actually largely on the the qualitative side of things. So while we might not necessarily be the ones who are collecting data on the quality of the soil, we're talking to the people, the farmers in that community around their usage, what they're experiencing, to then surface that. So I look at the kinds of data sets that we produce at Ushahidi with different organizations, complementing some of the data that's being collected on the earth. So imagine having the satellite data around tree coverage, or rather, forest coverage in a particular area, and then combining that with this feedback around, what's the usage, the energy usage in the community? What is actually driving that change, right? So giving you a much more holistic picture.
Mm-hmm. We can all give it a little bit of 3 different bits of information. Also the for agriculture in general, and especially the precipitation and how much water there is. And again, from space we can look. We have eyes below the surface as well, so we can see how our groundwater is missing. So an example for India, which feeds so many millions and hundreds of millions of people, we had just in 4 short years we had plus 20 centimeters in the northwestern part of India with a surplus of groundwater. Great for agriculture, great for planting. In 4 years, after an incredible drought, 18, 19, we are now at minus 10 under the surface. So that's kind of like looking at what the resources available for agriculture. And Will, you want to add to that?
No, I think it's great.
Okay, great. I would just say, but that's again, it takes everything. These are complex systems. I think there's no silver bullet here. So what can the satellite data help us with? But to your point, what about if you're measuring soil? We need sensors there on the ground as well. We need the quality of soil. How is it changing? Is it being regenerated? Are we planting multiple crops? Because multiple crops tend to regenerate it. We have to have that. We can't be doing just one basis, because that tends to deplete. And then to the point where, how do we get this data into people's hands, into the farmers' hands to use it? Mm-hmm. Because that's where everyone comes in. That's where the citizens. Change is going to be made with people and in communities collectively working together.
Yeah.
What else is on your minds? What else do you want to discover from our data revolution?
Yeah, I'm Dan Rabbit from...
If you could use, we're live, so if you can use the mic,
Dan Rabbit
thank you.
from Ball Corporation, and we'll be catching up later today. Curious to get your views on the small satellites. What they've done is amazing, and how quickly you can get them up, and the cost coming down. But where do you see the sensor technology going? Because I think your point on even needing ground sensors for certain things, I think if you get an advancement in the sensor technology from space, you can probably save a lot of money and time from having to have ground sensors in place and stuff.
Yeah, it's a very exciting field. I agree with all of the comments here about the fact that almost always it's a consortium of efforts of different sort of parties, from NGOs to citizen scientists to companies and technologists. And the combination is where we see the fantastic action. But in terms of just the pure satellite piece of it, I think we're seeing increases in the temporal frequency, the spatial resolution, and the spectral resolution. And the spectral resolution is particularly interesting, I think, for biodiversity tracking. At Planet, we're launching a few satellites, the first couple of satellites this year, but a whole fleet of satellites, which we call Carbon Mapper, but it's broader than just carbon. It's a hyperspectral fleet that have 400 spectral bands. It's in partnership with NASA JPL. And basically, these bands enable us to tell things like point source methane and CO2 emitters, but they also, because of the specific spectral signatures of different plants, we should be able to say this is this type of grass in this grassland, or this type of mangrove in this mangrove, this type of pine in this pine boreal forest, or what have you. And that can help when you can imagine a combination of bio-blitzes on the ground, where in very local areas you do very accurate, high-fidelity measurements of all the different species. You combine that with the above-ground hyperspectral data, you should be able to get at extrapolating all the different biomes and biodiversity to broader regions. So I think, again, it's the combination that we're going to see be very useful. And just a final point, again, on the community side of it that you're bringing up so much, and we've got to empower people on the ground with these data sets, and in a way, and the combination is what is going to enable the great action around the planet.
Yeah, and I'd just like to add too, we have to bring in AI and how are we processing the data to your question. Because the sensors and changing the sensors, not just from our satellites, but airborne platforms on the ground. But it's really important now because what we can do with AI, so we can take it, so we have a forest bench project, so we can take it to identify those species and things. And the algorithms are, you can almost run them in real time, very quickly to identify areas that need attention. So that's part of the answer here too, is action. Is happens in the data and the data processing, of course. Please.
Thank you. I really appreciate this approach on this panel from multi-level approach from top down and bottom up, literally. Given what you alluded to, and you were talking about the importance of engaging communities for action, because we know the ask is going to be great, right? So when there are complex interventions, people have to do things. It's important to have pre-engaged, and not just in the context of emergency. So I want to bring up the notion of trust, right? We've talked about, in a sense, outer space and public space, but civic space is perhaps an additional and important dimension, especially when it comes to action. So I wondered from a Ushahidi perspective, your reflections on the almost unintended but necessary consequence of engaging people in building that civic space that can accelerate complex action and timely action in the context of, say, responding to emergencies.
That's a very fantastic question. I think, just as you've mentioned, I think the certain complexities that come with it. But of course, I think the one thing that we've seen over time that leads to success in some of the different projects that we've seen, it all starts with that key element, the trust. Right? There being, first of all, a shared goal and understanding around what the problem is and what role each of us is going to play. And then I think the key to behavioral change also lies in feedback loops, right? What are the actions that have been taken as a result that continue to build that trust? So when you decide to come in and engage this local community and say, hey, this is going to happen, do you actually go ahead and do that? Does the voice actually mean something? And so that also requires partnerships to be set up in place. So as whichever organization that's collecting data, do you have the mandate? Do you have the capacity to actually drive that change? And if you don't, what are the expectations that you're creating, and how are you managing them?
Thank you. Thank you for your great questions. We actually have a special announcement now too. We want to announce the Uplink Ocean winners. So Will, over to you.
Yeah, thanks very much. I have the great pleasure to announce the Uplink Oceans Challenge winners. As was pointed out in our Q&A, the oceans is one of the largest areas of the Earth, of course, and has some of the biggest challenges in terms of data and in terms of action to help us to ensure that we have a sustainable planet. And so we partnered the World Economic Forum with a consortium of actors to build this ocean data initiative, which, let me say, all the partners included Benioff Ocean Science Laboratory, EMOD-Net, Ferrogro, Hub Ocean, who's in the room here, Tidal, X, the Moonshot Factory, Canada's Ocean Supercluster, and the Economist World Ocean Initiative. And we encouraged startups and social enterprises to look at ocean data and in what could they do to boost conservation and sustainability. And so we're delighted to announce the 11 winners here today. And we in fact have a video talking about them. And so we're going to press play and recognize the fantastic innovation that these folks and teams have been putting in to protect our beautiful oceans. And with that, we'll play.
Congratulations to all the 11 winners of the Ocean Upgrade. I want to thank you, all the audience, Will and Angela. It's just the beginning of the Earth Data Revolution. Invite everyone to join us and partner with the forum. Thank you very much for attending.